Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and everything that once felt certain has shifted. The job you trusted slips through your fingers. A friendship you built your identity around fades into silence. A plan you held close collapses overnight. The world does not ask for your consent when it decides to test you. It simply arrives, uninvited, unannounced, demanding to know who you are when comfort is stripped away. This is where the Stoic finds his truth, not in days of ease, but in the furnace of loss. The Stoic does not pray for lighter burdens. He strengthens his shoulders. He does not beg the storm to pass. He studies the wind, learns its rhythm, and walks through the rain until his heart no longer fears getting wet. In the quiet of his mind, he whispers what Marcus Aurelius once wrote: "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." To the untrained soul, hardship is chaos. To the Stoic, it is order in disguise, a sacred mirror revealing all that is fragile and all that must endure. When pain visits, most people rush to close the door. They numb themselves with distractions, run to new lovers, chase money, chase noise. But avoidance is a slow death. The Stoic understands that the only way out is through. Every ache is a teacher, every loss a sculptor's chisel against the stone of your becoming. And so, he stands in the ruins of what was and studies the fragments without despair. What he sees is not destruction, but revelation, the shedding of all illusions that once kept him small. He learns that no one truly owns peace until they have stood naked before suffering and refused to kneel. Have you ever noticed how the human mind turns against itself when hardship arrives? The mind whispers, "You're alone, you're cursed, you've failed." But the Stoic listens and does not believe. He knows that these are not prophecies, they are fears, and fears are just thoughts that have forgotten their place. He observes them like passing clouds. He watches his anger rise, his sorrow burn, his anxiety spiral, but he does not merge with them. Like a mountain unmoved by the storm, he remains aware. Awareness, that is the first weapon of the Stoic, the ability to step back from his own chaos and see it for what it is, temporary, human, and harmless, to the soul that stays awake. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And isn't it true? Most people do not drown in the event itself. They drown in the waves of their own resistance. A Stoic man learns to stop fighting the sea. He lets the tide carry him, trusting that every current, no matter how violent, is steering him closer to mastery. But mastery is not indifference. It is not the cold rejection of emotion. It is the sacred discipline of not letting emotion become the master. The Stoic feels deeply, but he channels his pain into precision. His suffering does not make him bitter. It makes him lucid. He looks at his trials as a craftsman looks at raw material. "Here," he says, "is my chance to practice endurance. Here is my moment to practice patience, humility, restraint." For he knows that philosophy is not something you read. It is something you live when life removes every comfort you once depended on. And life will remove them. The Stoics did not hide this truth. Marcus lost his children to death and still governed an empire with composure. Epictetus was born a slave, beaten, and yet spoke of freedom as something internal, inviolable. They were not superhuman. They were simply awake to the truth that pain is part of the design, not a flaw in it. When a modern soul faces hardship, it often demands meaning. "Why me?" it cries. The Stoic smiles softly, knowing that the question is inverted. Life is not happening to you. It is happening for you. For your evolution, for your purification. The furnace does not ask the gold whether it wishes to burn. It simply burns away what is not gold. You too are gold. Beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, beneath the exhaustion that whispers you cannot go on, there is something ancient that refuses to break. That something is your nature, your logos, your divine spark. When the Stoic suffers, he returns to that essence. He asks not for rescue, but for remembrance. Remembrance of who he truly is when stripped of all false power. In that remembrance, even the cruelest hardship becomes sacred, because it is there, in the raw, unguarded confrontation with pain, that the self begins to dissolve and something vaster begins to emerge. Peace without condition, strength without aggression, serenity that no chaos can erase. There is a moment in every trial where the soul begins to fracture, where the body trembles, the mind screams for escape, and the heart wonders if it can bear one more blow. That is the precise moment the Stoic calls sacred. For it is there, standing on the edge of despair, that the illusion of control dies and the truth of endurance is born. Most people run from that edge. They reach for distraction, validation, or escape. But the Stoic remains. He breathes through the collapse, not because he enjoys pain, but because he understands what it gives him. Pain refines. Suffering exposes the false layers that comfort build. When life crushes him, he listens, not to the noise of fear, but to the silence beneath it. That silence is where wisdom lives. Seneca wrote that fire tests gold, adversity tests brave men. Every hardship, then, is not punishment but purification, the fire that strips away what is not essential. To the weak, it feels like death. To the disciplined, it feels like transformation. The Stoic understands this paradox, that the same storm which drowns one man baptizes another. What does it mean to live this way in a world that rewards avoidance? It means to face discomfort, not with complaint, but with curiosity. To sit with pain and ask, what is this teaching me about attachment? To witness failure and ask, where have I mistaken identity for outcome? Because at the root of suffering lies one truth, not pain itself, but resistance to it. The Stoic dismantles that resistance piece by piece until he discovers freedom, where most people only find frustration. He knows that life owes him nothing, not fairness, not comfort, not even understanding. He has released the childish need to make sense of every cruelty. Instead, he seeks meaning through acceptance. To accept does not mean to surrender to despair. It means to see things as they are and still choose calmness. This calmness is not weakness. It is the deepest strength, a form of power so silent, it frightens those who depend on chaos to feel alive. When others rage, he observes. When others cling, he lets go. When others despair, he rebuilds. Not because he is immune, but because he has trained his mind to separate what he can control from what he cannot. That single discipline is the hinge upon which his freedom turns. You too have that choice. Every morning, you wake with two paths. The first, resentment, blame, and indulgence in victimhood. The second, discipline, endurance, and quiet transformation. One path leads to endless reaction. The other leads to mastery. Which path are you walking? The Stoic understands that no emotion is permanent. Anger fades, sorrow softens, fear exhausts itself. What remains, if one stays long enough, is clarity. That clarity is the essence of Stoic living. To see reality without distortion, to stand in pain without identifying with it, to lose without losing oneself. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That realization is not intellectual. It is lived. It happens in the small, unseen choices, when insult meets silence, when chaos meets composure, when failure meets persistence. Modern psychology calls this emotional regulation. The Stoics called it virtue, the alignment between reason and nature. In Jungian terms, it is individuation, the integration of the shadow, the acceptance of what was denied. The Stoic sees that his anger, fear, and grief are not enemies to be destroyed, but aspects of the psyche waiting to be understood. By understanding them, he integrates them, and through integration, he transcends. So when hardship comes again, and it always will, he no longer asks, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, he asks, "Who am I becoming because of this?" That is the secret most never learn. Hardship is not the enemy of peace. It is its creator. Without it, the spirit remains untested, the heart remains soft, and wisdom remains theoretical. Every scar, every sleepless night, every silent battle is evidence that you have met reality and not retreated. You have stood where comfort ends and chosen to grow rather than collapse. That choice, repeated enough, becomes character. And character, as the Stoics knew, is destiny. In the end, it is not the storm that defines you, but the steadiness of your sail. The Stoic's sail does not break because it bends. It adapts to wind, adjusts to current, and moves forward, no matter how rough the sea. To live this way is not easy, but it is sacred, for it means to walk through suffering, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a participant in one's own evolution. There comes a stage when hardship no longer shocks you, not because life has become easier, but because your perception has transformed. You begin to see pain not as an interruption, but as an initiation. The old self resists this. It fights, bargains, pleads for return to comfort. But the Stoic knows that comfort is not the goal. Clarity is. Clarity is born in the fire of endurance. It arrives quietly after the last tear has fallen, after the mind has exhausted every excuse. In that stillness, one sees that suffering is simply the mind's rebellion against what is. Once that rebellion ceases, peace enters like air, returning to the lungs after suffocation. Epictetus taught that freedom is the ability to accept events as they occur. That lesson strikes deeper than most are willing to face, because to truly accept is to stop asking life to be fair. It is to stop demanding outcomes that match desire. It is to say, "Let this be as it is," and mean it, not from resignation, but from understanding. Most people confuse acceptance with weakness, but the Stoic knows it is the ultimate strength. When you no longer fight what cannot be changed, you conserve the energy needed to change what can. When you stop grasping for control over others, you gain mastery over yourself. This is not passivity, it is precision. The disciplined use of emotion, thought, and action. Life's hardships are not random. They are mirrors reflecting your hidden attachments. The things that cause you the most pain are often the things you refuse to release. The Stoic looks closely at his suffering and asks, "What am I still clinging to that keeps this alive?" And with time, he learns the art of letting go, not in defeat, but in grace. Grace does not mean indifference. It means choosing stillness in the presence of chaos. It is the quiet power of a mind no longer enslaved by reaction. In modern psychology, this is emotional maturity. the ability to experience pain without letting it define identity. The Stoics understood this long before Freud or Jung gave it words. They knew that peace is not a reward, it is a practice. So the Stoic begins to practice in small moments, when insult meets patience, when failure meets focus, when fear meets breath. Each trial is training, each discomfort is rehearsal for the next storm. He learns to transmute emotion into understanding, chaos into order, loss into wisdom. This transformation does not happen once, it happens daily. It is not a single moment of enlightenment, but an ongoing discipline, the sharpening of the inner blade. The world will test that blade again and again, through betrayal, uncertainty, illness, and grief. Yet every trial deepens the cut of awareness until nothing external can wound the essence that remains. You might wonder, does the Stoic ever feel joy? The answer is yes. But his joy is not dependent on circumstance. It arises from alignment, from living in accordance with nature. Not the external nature of seasons and stars, but the inner nature of the soul. When one acts with virtue, with courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice, joy follows naturally, quietly, and without permission. This joy cannot be taken because it was never borrowed. It is born from the self-sufficiency of the spirit. The Stoic needs little because he has discovered that what he truly seeks cannot be given or removed by others. And yet, the Stoic is not detached from humanity. He feels compassion more deeply because he no longer resists reality. He sees others lost in their wars against what is and understands their suffering without judgment. He helps where he can, not to prove goodness, but because virtue demands it. His calmness becomes a refuge for those still learning to stand. When hardship comes, as it inevitably will, he greets it not with bitterness, but with recognition. Ah, he thinks, here is my next lesson. And in that simple phrase lies the wisdom of ages. For life, in all its chaos and cruelty, is nothing more than the classroom of the soul. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every unanswered prayer, a teacher in disguise. The Stoic's greatest discovery is that hardship cannot destroy what is real. It can only strip away what is false. What remains after loss is truth, unpolished, eternal, and indestructible. That is the prize hidden inside the pain. When a man or woman truly understands the purpose of hardship, something irreversible happens inside them. The old cycle of resistance shatters. They stop pleading for an easier path and begin to walk with deliberate calm through the fire. This is where the Stoic transcends ordinary living, where suffering no longer defines, but refines. Hardship, to the ordinary mind, is a thief. It steals comfort, love, stability, and dreams. But to the Stoic, hardship is a sculptor. It chisels away illusion, false pride, and attachment until what remains is essence. The soul stripped of vanity, standing unshaken before fate. This understanding does not make the Stoic cold. It makes them luminous. The more they lose, the more light they emit, for what is real in them cannot be burned away. The external world, wealth, status, approval, becomes like mist. They touch it, but are not bound by it. Their joy no longer depends on weather, on people, or on outcomes. It arises from alignment with truth. You may have noticed that life has a way of repeating the same lesson until it is learned. The same kind of betrayal, the same kind of failure, the same kind of silence. It is not coincidence, it is curriculum. The universe does not punish, it instructs. Each repetition is an invitation to respond differently, to evolve. And once the lesson is integrated, the pattern dissolves. Jung called this Individuation, the process of becoming whole by confronting the shadow. The Stoic knew this centuries earlier. What you avoid controls you. What you face, you integrate. The anger you repress festers until acknowledged. The grief you bury hardens until expressed. The weakness you deny becomes the very chain that binds you. But when you look directly into the shadow and say, "You are mine," you reclaim the power it once stole. This is the unseen art of Stoicism, the union of opposites, strength married to softness, discipline bound to compassion, detachment joined with deep awareness. The Stoic walks the middle path, neither suppressing emotion nor surrendering to it, but holding it like water in cupped hands, felt, understood, then released. In that release lies serenity, and serenity is not a gift. It is a decision, made daily, especially in chaos. When the world burns, the Stoic becomes the calm center, not because he is numb, but because he has accepted that suffering is the price of consciousness. The more awake you are, the more you feel, yet the less you are consumed. Have you ever stood in the middle of a storm and realized that nothing can actually harm the core of who you are? That realization is liberation. It's the moment when you stop measuring peace by the absence of problems and start measuring it by the depth of your presence within them. The Stoic carries that peace into every interaction. He speaks slowly, not from hesitation, but from mastery. He does not react to insult because he no longer sees others as enemies, only as reflections of their own pain. He forgives, not because others deserve it, but because resentment poisons the vessel that holds it. And yet, the Stoic is not detached from love. He loves more purely, without expectation. Because he no longer seeks to possess, he can truly connect. Because he no longer fears loss, he can give freely. That is the paradox of strength. The less you cling, the more deeply you can feel. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to think, to enjoy, to love." Notice that he did not speak of wealth, status, or control. He spoke of being, the simplest, most profound gift. To the Stoic, every sunrise is grace, every breath, a reminder that endurance itself is evidence of victory. So the Stoic continues, not in grand speeches or heroic gestures, but in quiet, consistent choices. When hardship knocks, he opens the door. When pain calls, he listens. When loss arrives, he bows, not in defeat, but in reverence. For he knows that every trial is shaping him into something the world cannot touch, a soul at peace with both triumph and tragedy. And perhaps that is the ultimate secret. The Stoic does not seek a life without pain. He seeks a soul untouched by it. He does not chase control. He cultivates composure. He does not pray for the storm to pass. He becomes the stillness within it. Eventually, hardship becomes less about survival and more about revelation. What once felt like cruelty begins to feel like precision, as if life itself were a teacher, meticulously carving away the unnecessary until only truth remains. The Stoic understands that the universe is not against him. It is training him. The blows are not punishment. They are instruction. Every loss reveals what cannot be lost. Every disappointment reminds him where he has placed his expectations. Every heartbreak humbles his ego and returns him to simplicity. Pain becomes the forge, and he, the blade, tempered, sharpened, unbreakable. There is a stillness that arrives when you stop resisting your trials. It's not apathy. It's the quiet power that comes from seeing reality clearly. When you no longer demand that the world conform to your preferences, the world loses its power to wound you. You still feel, you still care, but you no longer crumble. That is the essence of inner sovereignty. To modern minds, sovereignty sounds like independence, but the Stoic knows it is deeper. It is emotional self-governance. It is the ability to hold your own emotions, to parent your own mind, to soothe your own heart. You become your own shelter. This is not isolation, it is liberation. Because only the self-possessed can truly connect. The one who no longer seeks completion in others can love without fear of loss. The one who no longer fears rejection can speak truth with grace. The one who no longer depends on approval can lead without arrogance. In Jungian language, this is the full emergence of the integrated self, the union of shadow and light, masculine and feminine, reason and intuition. The Stoic stands at this center point, balanced, aware, whole. From this center, life ceases to be a battlefield and becomes a field of practice. Every challenge, every insult, every delay, practice. Every joy, every success, every moment of calm, practice. To live this way is to walk through fire and not be burned. It is to smile in uncertainty because you have ceased to need certainty. It is to grieve fully without becoming the grief. To fall and rise not out of stubbornness, but because rising is your nature. When storms come, and they always will, the Stoic looks upward, not for rescue, but in reverence. He remembers that he was built for this. That within his chest beats the same heart that carried warriors through famine, philosophers through exile, mothers through loss. The human spirit is older than pain and wiser than fear. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining." Simple words, but they contain the entire art of resilience, because complaining is resistance, and resistance feeds the fire. Endurance, on the other hand, transforms it. When you endure with awareness, suffering becomes meaning. So the Stoic does not seek escape, he seeks engagement. He meets reality on its own terms. He says yes, even to difficulty, because yes is the sound of growth. Yes is the sound of acceptance. Yes is the sound of peace. And slowly, the once fragile mind becomes unshakable. The once restless heart becomes serene. Hardship still visits, but it no longer finds an enemy. It finds an equal. That is the final transformation. When life's challenges no longer break you, because they are no longer separate from you. You and hardship are partners in evolution. You learn from it, it reveals you, and together you carve a soul capable of stillness in motion, grace in struggle, and light in darkness. The Stoic does not conquer life, he harmonizes with it, and in that harmony lies freedom, the kind that cannot be granted or taken, only realized.